talk for a minute? Baby, can we talk for a minute? Can we talk for a minute? Can we talk for a minute? Baby, can we talk for a minute? Can we talk for a minute? Let's just talk for a minute. Let's talk about the way we've been living. Shooting this podcast, trying to make a difference. We could talk about your goals, or let's talk about your vision. We could talk about the foul way that people have been living.
What's going on, everybody? It's Mikkel with Let's Talk with Mikkel Mutassit. Today our special guest is
Mac Bedard.
Before we get into the interview, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born and raised in Jacksonville, North Carolina. My mother and father came to Jacksonville in April of 1955, and I came into the world in 1956, January. And my first address was Kerr Street, who is a significant name in this research that I'm doing. And I conducted research for about 10 years, started in 2004. And it was a thing that I didn't really know I was getting myself into because it became a 24/7 job. I did that for like 10 years. And I still do some research when people ask me about their families, because that's basically what the research is based on, family history. As the history will show that the families came together and they created communities, and those communities became a family again. Everybody was a family. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about as we get into this subject matter.
So what's the real story behind how Jacksonville got its name?
Jacksonville was named after Andrew Jackson. Now, speaking of names, being that Georgetown is the central focus of the black communities in Onslow County because the school was there. Georgetown, one of the things I learned was the source of Georgetown name. No one had never given me an answer to that. Well, there was a fella, he was an overseer on the plantation, Humphrey Plantation in Richland. On that plantation was a overseer. His name was Robert George. Now, he went into the Confederate Army, mustered out as a sergeant. He married a young girl from Jones County, Susan Eubank. And at the time, she was 16 and he was 42. So, that was a relationship. But anyway, the community was named after Georgetown. He's the one that owned the land and started selling it to the black residents, those that were just coming out of slavery. Yeah.
So what was Jacksonville like before the military took over the scene?
The military got here in the 40s. Jacksonville was a rural area. Its biggest industry was agriculture. And of course, the base came in and began to change a lot of things. And it had a big impact on our lives because there were a lot of people that lived on the land that Camp Lejeune now occupies. And they were forced off and had they moved their residents to other communities. Kellamtown was one, for instance. When they were moved off, Kellamtown was basically nothing but woods and swamps. As a matter of fact, it was called Rattlesnake Island. So the folks moved into that area, and Mr. William Chadwick, who they referred to as the mayor, spearheaded that community. And one of the first interviews that I had the privilege of doing for this research was his son. I can't think of his name right now. What is his name? But anyway, he was one of the first people that I interviewed to do it. And it was the takeoff of a thing that became eye-opening. My mother told me when we were growing up to never talk about anybody in Onslow County, Jacksonville, because everybody's related. Yeah, but when I started this research, sure, there's a lot of people that are related and didn't even know it. So that was another good thing about this research. I was able to connect families together. As a matter of fact, speaking of that plantation that Robert George was on, I have a friend named Mr. Buddy Pickett, and he asked me to do research on his family. And one night I was sitting with the records looking through them, and I found his great-grandmother on that plantation where Robert George was overseer. So the next time I saw Buddy, I said to him, do you know that you're related to the Pickets? He said, nah. And I said, here's your great grandmother on that plantation, uh, William uh, Plantation, William Humphrey Plantation.
How did Camp Lejeune change the game for Jacksonville growth and culture?
It turned things around. That's for sure. And like I said previously, um, people had to move. They had to relocate, and there a lot of things came out of there. For instance, when they took that land, they were going to take the Hammocks Beach. There used to be a resort for black folks, but now it's state run. But they were going to take Hammocks Beach, and Dr. Sharp, who bought the land, he was from New York, and he was a brain surgeon, world-renowned brain surgeon. He bought that land. So when the government got ready to take that piece of land, he made a phone call to FDR, the president, because they went to school at Harvard at the same time, so he knew each other. So that was the reason he was able to keep his property. So,
You said Hammocks Beach. For people that's not familiar with that, where is that located at?
it's in the Swansbury area. That was a beach that Dr. William Sharp left in the hands of John Hurst. John Hurst was a 17-year-old, 18-year-old fishing and hunting guy. Dr. William Sharp came from New York with some buddies, and they were fishing and hunting. And just for fate to happen, John Hurst and William Sharp became good buddies. And he said to John one day, I like this part of the country. I want to buy some property. So he bought Hammocks Beach, 4,600 acres of land, 2 miles of Atlantic coastline. And one day, William Sharp says to John Hurst, I'm not coming back here anymore, so I'm going to leave this land in your hands, in your family hands, and you can maintain it as long as you use it for the education and entertainment of the black people in Onslow County and the surrounding areas. So that was through Dr. Sharp that we had access to that land.
So what type of events was held on that land?
It was a lot of people from out of town. That was like a little resort for a lot of people. People came from Charlotte. And Jacksonville, one of my friends used to refer to it as God's country, and we would laugh about it. And later on, I had a better understanding that he had something going on because as small as Jacksonville, Onslow County was at the time, a lot of people came here during Georgetown's education process. We had teachers from Charlotte that would come in, and from all over the state that would come in and stay during the school year, and then go back home during the summer. And then some that would move here, well, they stayed and married and raised families. So Georgetown represented a lot of progress and unity in a group of people that prospered quite well. Every community has their own business, and within that community, there was an economic base that was there, and the money flowed around the communities, and people were able to help one another. There's quite a few stories about people being in need and how their neighbors and family members come to their aid, something that's lost today. First of all, the families are scattered, and the history of the families, just like the history of Georgetown and other organizations, are lost. And we have to be about the process of getting that back together because we need to know who we are. And once we know who we are, then we won't be so easily led in one direction or another by some fashion or fad.
So when you say neighborhoods have their own business, can you give us some examples of some businesses that was around here?
The James brothers, they had just about every kind of business there was. They had a pool room, they had a cleaners, they had a grocery store, they had a trucking company. They were very industrious people. Talking about Mr. Merlin Jones, he had the Ash. Mr. Bubba Hopkins, he had the the cafe, the restaurant, and Mr. Lavender had the shoe shop. And then as I go back through the research, uh, we had a dry cleaners in what we call Black Bottom. Mr. Lawson, this was back in the 30s, and advertised in the papers. So they were very industrious people, and they had to be because they were not allowed privileges and access to other people's businesses. So, which was good because the money stayed, like I said, the money stayed in the community, and it helped those within the community. There's one story. Mr. Richard Hatcher used to he was a gas truck, drove a gas truck, deliver gas to people, and sometimes people didn't have money to pay for the gas, and he would give them gas anyway. And his grandson told this story, and he said that one day Mr. Richard went to work to pick up his check, and his check was short because they took every dime out of his check that he gave to the people that didn't have money.
So how much was gas back then?
I don't know, but whatever it was, they didn't have money to pay for it. Yeah. Things were relatively cheap, but everything was scarce. And another thing, the neighborhoods we grew up in, there was vegetation, meaning that we could go pick plums, blackberries, all these different kinds of things around the neighborhood, pecan trees, etc. Now those things are all gone. You go to the store now, and it's like, my God, once they were free, but now they're cost. So we have lost a lot. When they closed down Georgetown High School, they didn't only close down a school, but they also closed down the biggest employer of black folks in Onslow County. And at that time, we had a staff. In 1966, we had 16 master's degree holders over at Georgetown. It was a progressive school, and it was the first school to bring a state championship in football to Onslow County in 1955. And it was the first high school accredited in Onslow County, December 31st, 1958. So academically and athletically, Georgetown was second to none. As a matter of fact, during that time, the other high schools in the area, Richland, Swansboro, Dixon, they refused to play Georgetown. And they had good reason to. They had very good reason not to play Georgetown because they knew there was no win there.
What role did Jacksonville play in the civil rights movement, and how did it impact the community?
Well, in 1966, May the 29th, Sunday, it was the graduation ceremonies for Georgetown High School. And woke up that morning and there was smoke coming over the trees by the river. Georgetown School was on fire. And I never forget that morning, looked out the window and saw the smoke coming up over the trees. And my mother looked at my brother and my sister and me and said to us, "You don't have to go to church today." And that was kind of unbelievable because there were two places we had to go. That was school and church. And there was no questions about that. But so when she said, "You don't have to go to church today," it's like, "Oh, wow, okay, cool." I jumped back in bed, and about 10 minutes later, I said, wait, something must be wrong. We have a choice of not going to school. And then it dawned on me, yeah, something is real wrong. That was the year, as a matter of fact, your Uncle Tony, I never forget him saying this during an interview, because he was in that graduating class, 66. He said, "They blew up my school and sent me to Vietnam, and they ain't had sense since." So it was a devastating time for a lot of people across the nation. But being that we were here in Jacksonville, we didn't see a lot of things that other people saw in other cities and whatnot.
So, what's the history behind local black businesses in Jacksonville?
Well, one thing, um, the longevity of the businesses is not great. Like a lot of businesses, uh, after the first generation passed, the business usually dies with it. And then when integration came along, that made it even more difficult because people began to spend their money outside of the communities because they were given a privilege they didn't have before. And there were a lot of sayings about why that happened. But that was the beginning of the disintegration of the family and the communities.
What year was that in?
Back during the 60s, I'm specifically speaking about 1966. See, Georgetown High School was a school where all black students that was in high school and in the surrounding areas of the school from 1 through 12 went to that school. So if you live in Sneeds Ferry, Maple Hill, Georgetown, wherever you live, that's the school you went to because that was the only school that was open to us and for us, which was a great thing.
So, who were some OGs that helped build Jacksonville into what it is today?
There have been a lot of skilled laborers that did things in Jacksonville. Um, like I said, we had our own economic system within our communities. The churches played a big role because the churches were the focal point of all the communities. It's out of the church that came the school. See, when black folks came out of slavery, they knew they had to get two things, and that was land and education. And they had control of two institutions, that was the family and the church. So when you look at that history, you'll see how these people came together. One author said it was a collective intelligence, and that's what it was. The building of the school showed through generations. See, the association was formed in 1871. 7 ministers met in Jones County. They formed the association. And out of the association came the school. The school came about in 1902 in Jones County. Then they moved the operation to Georgetown. Deacon Henry Phillips, the deacon of Evening View, sold the land to the association, where the headquarters building is now. Sold the land to the association. Now, the beauty of that transaction was the money and the land stayed in the same hands. Deacon Phillips and his wife was the grantee and grantor. Deacon Phillips was. He was a member of the Board of Trustees. So the money stayed in the same hands. We don't have that kind of business savvy anymore. We lost it through integration. But that's the way that happened. And on that note, I will say that our history is our blueprint for the future. If we look at what our people did with nothing coming out of slavery, they didn't wait for anyone to give them anything. As a matter of fact, the story is a prime example. In 1928, J.T. Kerr, the founder of First Baptist Church and the principal of Georgetown at the time, went before the Board of Education and asked for a school bus for the transportation of the students at Georgetown. His request was denied, but in the same meeting, the folks in Sneeds Ferry asked for a bus and they got it. Well, our people didn't put up a big protest, making signs, marching, all this stuff. What they did, they went out and bought a 1926 Ford pickup truck. On the bed of that truck, they put a top on it and had 3 rows of benches, 2 on the side and 1 in the middle. And that was the first bus, so to speak, that Georgetown had. Now, it would have cost them $24 a year to operate that bus. If they turned it over to the county, which they did, it only cost $1. So they turned the bus over to the county, but the county wouldn't do any maintenance or anything to it. So everything had to be done by the school itself. That's one example of what they did in spite of any opposition they came across.
So how have the people of Jacksonville kept their culture and traditions alive through the years?
Basically through the church, because we don't have a facility to house any of our artifacts, or we don't have a facility to bring people in and to teach them about their history and their culture. So it's been basically through the church that what we have left of our history remains. But hopefully we're going to do something about that soon.
So what's a part of Jacksonville history that most people sleep on?
Themselves. The most important thing we forget is how important we are. And we don't know that because we don't know who we are from a spiritual perspective, from a historical perspective, from a human being perspective. We have not been taught, first of all, to love ourselves. That whole process of being dehumanized has been 4 or 5 centuries that we've been through this system of trying to be equal to someone that knows our history, a history that we don't even know. Our history starts before the beginning of time. Our history starts with God. We were the first people to introduce God to the world. We were here on earth before time because it was the people in Africa where civilization started. They're the ones that charted the stars and formed the first clock. They established civilization, which everything that you see in the world today is based on. They had a great deal of respect for nature. Instead of trying to conquer nature, they understood that it was to their advantage to live in harmony with nature. And as we see today, nature is being destroyed, and we are being told there's too many people on the planet. So you can imagine who the people they want to get rid of are. And some of them that are thinking about getting rid of, they think they're part of the club, but they're not.
So how did the city's connection to Highway 17 shape the hustle and the economy of Jacksonville?
Well, it was a thoroughfare, but I have more information about Highway 24. There was a fella, his name was Fred Hargett. He was a member of the North Carolina State Legislature. He was part of the Transportation Board. So he knew that the base was coming in, and he knew that Highway 24 was coming, and black folks owned that property. He had a store where he sold farm equipment, mules, and all other accessories. I heard this story twice. Nimrod Charrett was the man I was trying to think of. Mr. Nimrod Charrett and Mr. Clarence Henderson told me the same story on 2 different occasions. Fred Hargett sold mules, and people used that land as collateral. The mules lasted about 6 months at tops and would die. The people couldn't farm the land, couldn't pay him back. He got the land. And it's recorded in the courthouse. When you look at the deeds, you'll see he got land real cheap, and the word is indebtedness. He was able to get that land through that. So it's been a lot of things that has happened to people in losing land. like I said, when the slaves came out of slavery, they knew they had to get two things. I was looking at one deed. Eli White lived in Richlands, North Carolina in the 1880s. He had three children. He left each one of those children 160 acres apiece. 160 acres of land apiece. Now, to give you some perspective of 160 acres, if you're familiar with the First Baptist Church in Georgetown, that's 25 acres. So imagine how much land that is. And he was not the only person that had property. A great number of people had property. The Merle brothers that came out of Richlands, Alfred and Martin Merle, which Merle is named for, they in 1872, they purchased about 25 acres of land, and 4 or 5 years later, they purchased hundreds of acres of land, and that's why that's called Merle Hill. There are other people that did the same thing. So when it came to taking care of business and taking care of what had to be taken care of, that's what they did. Once again, our history is a blueprint for our future. If we look at what they did, they had nothing. And it amazes me sometimes because if you think about it, these people came out of slavery with no education, but they had enough sense to know that their children and those behind them was going to need an education. They built a school that they never went to. They started a school that they never went to. And I said, these people didn't have education, built a school. Now we have all the education. Where's our school? We have to think about those things. We have to think about what they did. They had self-determination. They didn't wait for anyone. But the thing they did have to deal with, and that's the illusion of integration. That's the thing that we have been dealing with, the illusion of integration. What does that mean? Well, when you look at it, that means that we lost basically everything that we had. I was talking to a good buddy of ours, Charles Pierce, Sir Charles, which most people know as Ruff. He was standing in front of his house one day, and I said to him, think about all the black men that used to be on this street. Mr. Willingham, your granddaddy, Mr. Mike Abbott has business over there. And I said, yeah. I said, now look, you're the only black man on this street now that lives here.
So going back to the land and stuff, like, why do you think people think it's so popular, like, to sell the land instead of keeping it, like how they did back in the old days?
Well, land did not have the value of the illusion that the American dream had. And by saying that, I mean this. The people that worked that land, it was hard work, and jokingly, a lot of them said, I'm not doing that work anymore. So they left and moved away. And that land didn't have the same value that it has now. For instance, Black Bottom in Georgetown, where the houses now on the river, there used to be Black Bottom where black folks lived in houses. And so that was called Black Bottom because the land was on the river. It was not good land for growing crops. So when you look at the history of Onslow County, you'll see that around the rivers and whatnot, that's where the black people were, Sneed's Ferry. You look around the river and that's where they were. Well, once agriculture no longer was the king, that bottom land became waterfront property. And that's what's happening in Georgetown now. A big tract of land changed hands. And now they're getting ready to develop it, and things are going to change.
And it's a big difference now, ain't it? Like back in the day, like you could get land for fairly cheap, right? And now it's through the roof.
Yeah, land doesn't have the same value now. I mean, it has more value now than it did then. More people are moving into the area, and with the base, well, people come here and don't leave. It's a good place to live. as Dan White said, it's God's country. So people stick around, and it has changed quite a bit since I've been living. Places that used to be dirt roads are not dirt roads anymore. Neighborhoods are changing, so there's a lot changing going on.
So, what are some old school neighborhoods or spots that had a major impact on the city's culture?
The ones I was speaking about earlier, Sneeze Ferry, Richlands, every section had something going on. And one of the things that was truly a thing that the communities were involved in, that's baseball. The older guys were baseball fans, and each community had a baseball team. Mr. Johnny Crawford was our captain, our coach downtown, and you had other folks, Mr. Reverend Jordan. He was a baseball coach out in Hines Farm. People would go, but thing about downtown Jacksonville, we had lights. We played under the lights in the 1960s. That was pretty astronomical for the situation that we were living in. But yeah, we played under the lights.
How many teams y'all think you had total?
Oh, like I said, but basically every community, because we went to Pollocksville, they went down to Wilmington and played. So all it's a nice.
Dang, so y'all traveled.
Yeah.
So, how have the older generation in Jacksonville paved the way for the city's growth and development?
The old names that basically were in Jacksonville originally, they're still here and they're still doing the same things. Like I said, when integration came along, our entrepreneurs died off and businesses were closed and people were moving on and moving out. Like the song The Jefferson, Moving On Up. I had one alumnus said to me once, yeah, my class was the most successful class. And what he was talking about was the individuals that came out of his class, doctors and lawyers, etc. And that just shows that the school produced champions and scholars and people who were very successful in life. But as I said before, when the closing of Georgetown came about, that just split a lot of things up.
So, you talking about being successful in life? I heard a lot of people talk about you. What did you used to do? You used to be a playwright or something like that. Do you still do it, or?
I still write. I write every day. I read every day. I try to keep my mind busy, and I don't watch television. I unplugged my television about 7 years ago. No, not 7, 4 years ago. I was watching television one day. Baseball game was on. This is during the pandemic. And I said, I haven't watched a baseball game in a while. I watch a baseball game. I close up the picture on the mound, background noise. And when they pulled back and showed the stadium, there was no one in the stadium, but there was background noise. Like people were in the stadium. And then they showed the backstop and they had cut out cardboard people standing behind. I said, oh my God, have we come to this? So I turned my TV off and never turned it back on.
Okay, so what's the history behind Georgetown High School and why is it so important, the Jacksonville story?
That's the Georgetown was the culture arts center of Onslow County. The band, whatever parade they were in, they were the highlight of the parade. Mr. Weaver formed that band in 1953, and it was a Showtime band. They, like all aspects of Georgetown, we took pride in what we did. Mr. McClure was our Cub Scout master. He was one of those that lived in Charlotte during the summer, but he lived and worked here in Onslow County. He was a teacher, Cub Scout master. And he said to us, we're getting ready for the Christmas parade. He says, gentlemen, we're going to march when we get in this parade. And you will see other troops just walking and looking and laughing and turning their heads and waving. Say, we don't do that. We're Georgetown. We march. And all the people with suits will be marching on the outside, and all the people without uniforms will be marching on the inside. And sure enough, we marched down Court Street, and the other little troops, they were twisting and turning and waving and laughing. Not us. We were straight. We were sharp. So that's the type of thing that Georgetown instilled in us. And we took it and we were able to use those things in our life to become the successes that we set out to be. We were taught how to dress. James Shubrick was telling us one time how Mr. White brought every guy in his class a handkerchief. Each man should have a handkerchief, those type of things. Shoes, shiny shoes, you know. So they took care of us, not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. Georgetown was truly a community-based school. Your parents didn't have to make an appointment and go to the school to talk with the teacher, because the teacher lived right down the street or across the yard. Mr. Broadhurst, the principal, he would go to different churches on Sunday to make sure that his faculty was going to church. So it was a tight-knit community, and people worked together throughout. I never forget one Sunday, we were leaving church, and my mother and Mrs. Thompson, who was my fifth and sixth grade teacher, was walking slow and talking low. So I'm thinking about, what did I do this week? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I couldn't think of a thing. So I got home, took my church clothes off, and went back in the kitchen and found out that I had committed a felony. My shirt tail was out. So try to explain that my loop on my belt had broken, on my pants had broken, and my belt was bridling up, so I pulled my shirt down to cover up my belt. Yep, I got time for that.
Before we get out of here, I know you see I have a few signatures on the table. I'd like you to be one of the people that signed it and dated. So if you don't mind, can you sign it and date it, please?
Sure will. And thank you so much for having me here to talk a little bit about the history.
Yes, sir. We'd love to have you back one day to talk about some more history.
And I would love to come back.
Tell a friend, let's talk.